Hello and welcome to the next wave of digital video. I'm your host, Tony Reale. Today I'm going to give you 5 tips for cinematic lighting. Tip number 1 is learn the rules of lighting. First thing is, of course, 3-point lighting. That's your key light, your backlight, and your fill light. Your key light, usually you want to have about 45 degrees off of the camera, and then your fill light would be the light that comes in and adds the ratio for how dramatic you want it. In this scene that I have right here, it's a little bit more dramatic, so I might have less fill. In other scenes where you want a more high key or more natural lights, you might have a more fill in there, so that'd be less dramatic. And then, of course, your backlight to add separation in the background. That's standard 3-point lighting. If you want to know more about lighting ratios, we did a video about lighting ratios. You can find that link in the description below. Another popular rule is Rembrandt lighting. And this has to deal with the key light position, having it be slightly above camera and off to the side so that it creates a kind of light triangle below the non-key side of the face, as you see in this example. It's very, very popular and very common for a standard for where you should put your key light. Another important rule is to expose your background lower than your main subject. So having it at least 1 stop or more underexposed from your subject. This will allow another level of natural separation. So now that we've gone over a few of those rules, the next tip is really learn when to break the rules. It's very important to know the rules and know where to use them and why they're important, but it's also important to break free of those and learn how to have different styles of unique lighting. An example of that would be potentially mixing color temperatures. In this example where I'm lighting myself, I have a tungsten light to my left, and then I also have a daylight backlight for the background and also a backlight. So I'm mixing color temperatures. One thing that's also really fun in lighting is what I call dirty lighting, is where the key light position or your backlight's all in different positions. Your exposure might be a bit underexposed, or you might have a really harsh backlight, or your key light might be really extreme to the side. Experiment with positioning your light, especially when you're doing narrative work, in a way that the key light might not be at that traditional Rembrandt side or that position that we talked about in traditional 3-point lighting. That's okay. Let the lighting dictate to the mood and the feel of the scene. A great example of this is Richardson lighting. This is a technique where you take a very hard backlight and you bounce it against the floor or a tabletop or a surface in front of the subject, and it creates the key light. So your backlight is also creating that bounced key light. It oftentimes blows out the hair light and it can look overexposed, but it's a dirty style of lighting that's very popularized by Richardson, and creates a beautiful look. When you're doing dirty lighting, as I call it, a lot of times you'll find happy accidents that happen. You might have a splash of light that kicks in from a spare window, or you might have something like that flares out the camera in a unique way. That's okay. Experiment with these things and you can create some really beautiful looks that give a natural feel to your lighting. It makes it feel more organic than the sterile traditional lighting that you might get if you're just sticking to the 3-point lighting rule. The next tip I'm going to give you is to make your key light larger. No, larger yet. No, even larger. As soon as I started getting my key light beyond the 24-inch softbox, I started getting some beautiful results. And to the point where I went into, would never key anything smaller than a 4-foot silk. And then recently I got an 8-foot silk, which allowed me to get even better results. So we're actually going to do a video on how to create these large key light sources for everything from the pro level all the way down to the budget friendly level. So you can check on that video coming down the road. But a major tip that I can give you is get that key light larger. You're going to create a much softer light, more flattering light, and it's going to be much more cinematic. Chances are the biggest thing that you might be running into is why aren't my skin tones, why aren't my lighting as cinematic as I see in the movies? And most often is because your lighting source is just not big enough. If you look at the behind the scenes in a lot of films, they have very, very large keys. So that's an important step, getting that light as big as you can. Doesn't always apply. Sometimes it does. It is important to have a smaller key or a harder key. But having a really large soft key can be really beautiful. Tip number 4 is called reverse keying. And this is where you take your key light and you place it on the opposite side of the subject from the camera so that your shadow side of your face falls onto the camera side. This is a much more flattering key light than placing the key on the same side as your subject and your camera. That's called more flat lighting. And there may be times where that's necessary. You know, if you're going off a motivated scene where you have a lamp or you have a window and that's in the same position and you have to work with that, it's okay. But always try, when possible, to get that light on the opposing side. Reverse keying is much more beautiful. It creates a much more natural look, and it's a technique that I try to do whenever possible. Frankly, you know, you want to have that shadow side always falling towards the camera, which leads us to our final tip, which is always be backlighting, ABB. My gaffer and grips always joke with me that ABB is my mantra, but always be backlighting is a tip that I have to create, again, the final level of cinematic lighting. Backlighting is so important because it creates depth and dimension in a scene, not only in your subject, but across the board. Again, you want to always go by motivation. So if there's a lamp on a different side or whatever, you may not always have that option, but try to get a motivated light to be in the way that you can create a backlight. Tips for backlights include trying to keep it at least one stop brighter than your key light. Sometimes you can have it several stops brighter, but always try to get it at a little bit brighter level than your key light. Make sure you experiment with soft backlighting. A lot of people think a backlight is just a hard tungsten lamp or something like that. But in fact, backlights can be many things. And I found personally that some of the prettiest backlights that I've ever used are soft backlights. And you know, so again, you can have a soft light or a silk or whatever over the top of that that light and creating another level soft light. It's just a beautiful, sculpts the entire body and creates this really natural and aesthetically pleasing backlight separation. And one of my favorite things to do with backlights is also put them on the key side of the camera. A lot of times you'll see people put the backlight on the opposing side, as in this lighting scenario that we have here. We have the key side over here, and we have the backlight separating me over here. That's fine for interviews and it can work plenty of times. But more often than not, if you look at natural lighting, the brighter source is often going to be on the same side that your key light. So if you have sunlight coming through a window and bouncing off of a wall and then bouncing back in a person's face, a lot of times that's your backlight and your key light is coming in from the same side. Key side backlight is really, really pretty because frankly, when you know, I'm doing a direct-to-camera interview, but if I was looking this way and we're doing like a narrative scene, if I really had that backlight coming in, it's going to be almost pointing directly into my ear. That's not really that pretty, and not, you know, no one really wants to see the inside of a person's ear. But if you have that key side backlight, you're kind of sculpting these different layers. So you have, you know, your backlight, it's almost a rainbow of lighting. You have a harder backlight, then going into a little bit softer of your key light, and then into the fill light or no fill light of the next, you know, gradient. So it's a really, really pretty look. And some things that a lot of early young filmmakers, when they're so used to three-point lighting, where the backlight always has to be on the opposite side of the key, that's what they're taught. And when you break free of that and you learn that you can have that backlight on the same side as that key, you can get some really, really beautiful results. So I really hope you guys found that helpful. We're going to go into depth in some of these sections, talking more about creating a large key light and then different ways to create soft and hard backlights as well. So be sure to subscribe and check out those future videos.